The polished chrome and soft leather of Apex Airline's first-class cabin gleamed under the carefully calibrated ambient lighting, a sanctuary of quiet privilege humming 30,000 feet above the earth. Passengers settled into pods that cost more than most people's cars, sipping champagne and adjusting noise-canceling headphones. Into this hushed world stepped Sarah Vance, an island of unassuming simplicity. Her gray sweater dress, though clean and well-kept, lacked any designer label. Her worn canvas tote bag rested at her feet, contrasting sharply with the sleek leather carry-on surrounding her. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her only jewelry was a thin silver bracelet. At 35, her face held a quiet warmth, her hazel eyes taking in the cabin with gentle observation, not envy or awe. She found her seat 2A and tucked her tote beneath it, pulling out a well-loved paperback novel. She seemed entirely out of place, a sparrow that had wandered into an eagle's eyrie, and the eagles were beginning to notice, their sharp eyes assessing this unexpected anomaly in their exclusive domain. Across the aisle, Clarice Huntington, a woman whose diamonds glittered with almost aggressive intensity against her tailored silk blouse, leaned towards her husband, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "Good heavens, Richard," she murmured, nodding subtly towards Sarah. "Did they start letting the competition winners fly first class now? Look at that dress. Probably knitted herself." Richard chuckled, a dry sound that rustled like old money. Further back, Marcus Thorne, a man whose pinstriped suit screamed boardroom dominance, snorted audibly while scrolling through stock reports on his tablet. He didn't even bother whispering, as he remarked to his seatmate, "Standards are slipping. Apex used to curate its clientele better. Now it seems anyone with a lucky upgrade can wander in." Sarah pretended not to hear, opening her book, the familiar weight a small comfort. But she felt the stares, the swift, dismissive glances that raked over her outfit, judging her worthiness based on fabric and thread count. She was used to it in a way. Her husband, David, often teased her about her determined refusal to adopt the trappings of their wealth, but she preferred it this way. Authenticity, she believed, wasn't woven into a price tag. Still, the pointed exclusion, the immediate assumption that she didn't belong, sent a familiar pang through her chest. She focused on the first page of her novel, hoping to lose herself in the story, but the cabin's atmosphere had already shifted, becoming subtly charged with unspoken judgment directed solely at her. The initial whispers soon escalated as boarding continued. A younger couple, dressed head to toe in coordinated, logo-heavy athleisure wear, paused by Sarah's seat. The woman, Tiffany, nudged her partner, Jake. "Look, babe," she said, loud enough for Sarah and several others to hear. "That's the kind of bag my grandma takes to the farmer's market." Jake laughed, snapping a quick, obvious photo with his phone. "Gotta document the wildlife," he quipped, winking at Marcus Thorne, who offered a thin smile of approval. The air thickened with shared amusement at Sarah's expense. Then came the flight attendants. Brenda Jenkins, the lead attendant, approached Sarah with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, her posture radiating professional skepticism. "Ma'am," she began, her tone overly bright, "may I just reconfirm your seat assignment? Sometimes there are last-minute changes." Sarah politely showed her boarding pass, the name Sarah Vance clearly visible, alongside seat 2A. Brenda took an unnecessarily long time examining it, her gaze flicking between the pass and Sarah's simple attire. She murmured, handing it back with a hint of reluctance. "Very well. Let me know if you need anything." The implication was clear. She doubted Sarah would require the usual first-class amenities. Her colleague Leo, younger, and seemingly eager to please the more affluent passengers, hovered nearby. He offered Clarice Huntington another glass of champagne with a flourish, but walked past Sarah without making eye contact, despite her empty water glass. The differential treatment was blatant, a silent reinforcement of the passenger's verdict. Sarah didn't fit in. She saw Clarice lean over and whisper something to Brenda, followed by a shared, knowing smirk directed her way. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow, calming breath. It wasn't about the champagne or the fawning service. It was the deliberate act of making her feel invisible, of judging her worth based on superficial markers she actively chose to reject. She opened her book again, determined not to let their petty elitism ruin her flight. She had a long day ahead when they landed, a charity board meeting she was chairing, and she needed to conserve her energy. But the quiet hostility was a persistent buzz, impossible to completely ignore, a discordant note in the otherwise serene cabin. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the performance of preferential service intensified. Brenda personally attended to Clarice, adjusting her pillow, offering a selection of magazines with a deferential air. "Mrs. Huntington, can I get you our signature cashmere blanket? The cabin can get a bit chilly," Brenda cooed, her voice dripping with practiced solicitude. Clarice accepted with a gracious nod, casting a sideways glance at Sarah, who was reaching into her tote for her own simple pashmina. Marcus Thorne received similar attention, with Leo eagerly discussing the wine list, ensuring his glass was never less than half full. When Sarah quietly pressed her call button, intending to ask for some water, it went unanswered for several minutes. Finally, Leo approached, his expression bored. "Yes?" he asked, without the "ma'am" he liberally sprinkled on others. "Could I please have some water?" Sarah requested politely. Leo sighed dramatically. "I'll see what I can do. We're very busy serving the other passengers right now," he replied, before turning abruptly and heading back towards the galley without waiting for a response. Minutes later, he returned and placed a small plastic cup of water on her tray table without a word, a stark contrast to the crystal glasses the others were using. Tiffany and Jake, across the aisle, openly snickered, filming the interaction. "OMG, service!" Tiffany mock whispered to her phone camera, captioning her social media story. "Coach service in first. Apex fail. Some people don't belong." The post instantly garnered laughing emojis and comments like, "Kick her out," and "Why is she even there?" Sarah sipped the water, ignoring the plastic cup, ignoring the stares. But the deliberate nature of the slight, orchestrated by the crew and cheered on by the passengers, felt like a deliberate tightening of the net around her, isolating her further within the bubble of privilege she had inadvertently entered. Her simple dress felt less like a choice and more like a target painted on her back. She reminded herself of David's words, "Your strength isn't in what you wear, Sarah. It's in who you are." But today that strength felt heavily besieged. The meal service became another stage for the quiet drama. Brenda presented menus bound in leather to everyone except Sarah. When Sarah politely inquired about the options, Brenda feigned surprise. "Oh, I didn't realize you'd be dining with us, ma'am. The first-class meals are quite rich. Perhaps something lighter from the economy menu would be more suitable?" The condescension was palpable. Clarice Huntington overheard and chimed in, her voice carrying easily. "Brenda, darling, don't trouble yourself. People with simpler tastes often prefer simpler fare. Less upsetting for the digestion, you know." She smiled sweetly at Sarah, a predator playing with its food. Marcus Thorne added dryly, "Probably saves the airline money, too." "Smart thinking," Sarah simply replied, her voice steady. "I'll have the grilled salmon, please, as listed on your premium menu." Brenda's smile tightened into a thin line. "Of course," she clipped, taking the order with ill-disguised reluctance. The meal, when it arrived, was presented hastily, without the linen napkin or the polished silverware given to others. Leo practically dropped the tray, muttering something about needing to attend to priority guests. During the meal, Clarice loudly recounted a story about a disastrous encounter with riffraff at a charity gala, frequently glancing toward Sarah to ensure the parallels were understood. Several passengers laughed obligingly. The coordinated effort to make her uncomfortable was exhausting. Sarah ate slowly, focusing on the taste of the food, trying to block out the noise. She saw her reflection in the dark window, just a woman in a gray dress, eating alone, surrounded by people determined to misunderstand her. She felt a surge of weariness, not anger. Why did people invest so much energy in reinforcing these invisible walls? She finished her meal, pushed the tray away, and picked up her book, seeking refuge once more in its pages, though the words seemed to blur slightly. The silver bracelet on her wrist felt cool against her skin, a tangible link to her grandmother, a woman who had faced far greater hardships with unwavering grace. Sarah drew strength from that memory, steeling herself for the remainder of the flight. The hours crawled by, punctuated by the occasional pointed remark or dismissive glance. Sarah managed to lose herself in her book for a while, the narrative providing a temporary escape, but the undercurrent of hostility remained. When she got up to use the restroom, she overheard Leo whispering to another passenger near the galley, "No idea how she got the ticket, probably won some radio contest." The passenger laughed. Returning to her seat, she found her pashmina, which had slipped slightly off the armrest, now crumpled on the floor. Accidental, perhaps, but in the context of the day, it felt deliberate. She picked it up, smoothed it out, and placed it back, saying nothing. Clarice was now loudly discussing her upcoming trip to Monaco, detailing the exorbitant cost of her hotel suite and the designer wardrobe she'd purchased specifically for the casino. "One simply must look the part. Don't you agree, Richard?" she declared, loud enough for the entire cabin. "Appearances are everything." Marcus Thorne nodded in agreement, adding, "Presentation dictates perception. Always." It felt like a lecture directed straight at Sarah. As the plane began its descent, the fastened seat belt sign pinging softly, Sarah felt a sense of relief mingled with apprehension. The flight was almost over, but the final act, deplaning, felt like running one last gauntlet. Brenda walked through the cabin, collecting glasses and offering warm towels, her smile firmly back in place for everyone except Sarah, who received only a cursory nod. Tiffany and Jake were already gathering their designer bags, whispering and glancing toward Sarah, likely planning their final social media update on the first-class crasher. Sarah simply closed her book, took a sip of water from her own bottle she'd brought aboard, and waited, her composure intact, but her spirit undeniably bruised by the relentless, petty cruelty of strangers judging a book solely by its unassuming cover. She just wanted to get off the plane, meet David, and put this unpleasant journey behind her. The plane taxied to the gate, the familiar bump signaling their arrival in Chicago. The first-class passengers began to gather their belongings, eager to be the first off. Clarice adjusted her diamond earrings, giving Sarah one last dismissive look. Marcus Thorne was already on his phone, barking orders at someone. Tiffany and Jake jockeyed for position near the door, phone ready. Brenda and Leo stood near the exit, ready to bid farewell to their valued guests. "Mrs. Huntington, Mr. Thorne, such a pleasure having you," Brenda gushed. "Do fly Apex again soon." As Sarah gathered her tote bag and paperback, Clarice deliberately blocked the aisle for a moment, pretending to adjust her scarf, forcing Sarah to wait. "Oops, pardon me," Clarice said, not sounding sorry at all. Marcus pushed past Sarah without a word, bumping her shoulders slightly. As Sarah finally reached the door, Brenda offered a tight-lipped smile. "Have a satisfactory onward journey," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. Leo smirked behind her. Just as Sarah stepped onto the jet bridge, she heard Tiffany whisper loudly to Jake, "Finally, let the real people off now." The jet bridge felt long, a tunnel leading back to anonymity, which felt welcome after the cabin scrutiny. But as she neared the end, the usual crowd waiting for arriving passengers seemed different. There was a small cluster of people standing expectantly, two men in sharp Apex Airlines executive uniforms, an airport official, and standing slightly in front of them, looking directly at her with a warm, familiar smile, was her husband, David Carter. He wasn't flanked by security, wasn't making a scene, just waiting for her, his calm presence a stark contrast to the drama she just endured. He wore a simple navy blazer and chinos, looking more like a university professor than the billionaire owner of Apex Airlines. The executives, however, looked tense. Sarah's heart lifted as she walked towards him, the fatigue of the flight starting to recede. David stepped forward, ignoring the executives, and wrapped her in a gentle hug. "Hey, you," he murmured into her hair. "Rough flight?" Sarah just nodded, leaning into him for a moment. Behind them, the first-class passengers began to emerge from the jet bridge, blinking in the terminal lights. Clarice Huntington spotted David Carter immediately, her eyes widening slightly. She recognized him from society pages, though perhaps not instantly, as the airline owner. Marcus Thorne also paused, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Then Brenda Jenkins and Leo stepped off the plane, saw David Carter embracing the woman they'd mistreated, standing beside Apex executives, and froze. Their faces drained of color. Brenda's professional smile evaporated, replaced by dawning horror. Leo looked physically ill. David released Sarah gently and turned, his expression still calm, but his eyes holding a new, steely edge. He nodded towards the executives. "Gentlemen, thank you for meeting me. This is my wife, Sarah Vance." The executives offered slightly flustered greetings to Sarah, avoiding Brenda and Leo's terrified gazes. Clarice and Marcus had stopped nearby, pretending not to listen, but clearly absorbing every word. Tiffany and Jake hovered, their phones suddenly forgotten, eyes wide. David's gaze swept over Brenda and Leo, then flickered towards Clarice and Marcus. "Sarah had a rather unwelcoming experience on Flight 347 today," he said, his voice quiet but carrying undeniable authority. "An experience involving dismissive service, public commentary on her appearance, and a general assumption that she didn't belong in a cabin her family happens to own." The word "own" landed like a sonic boom. Clarice gasped audibly, clutching Richard's arm. Marcus Thorne went rigid, his face pale. Brenda Jenkins looked like she might faint. Leo was visibly trembling. Tiffany dropped her phone with a clatter. The small crowd of onlookers instantly understood. The simple woman in the gray sweater dress wasn't just a passenger. She was effectively their host, and they had spent the last 6 hours insulting her. David continued, his tone level. "Brenda, Leo, I believe you were the attendants?" Both nodded mutely, unable to speak. Apex prides itself on treating every passenger with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance. That's not just policy, it's our core value. A value, it seems, was entirely forgotten today. The consequences were swift and decisive, delivered with David Carter's characteristic lack of theatricality, but absolute finality. "Brenda, Leo," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "you're both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct on this flight and your service history. Report to HR." He nodded to one of the Apex executives, who stepped forward grimly. Brenda opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize or explain, but David cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "The time for explanations was when you chose how to treat a passenger. You made the wrong choice." Leo simply stared at the floor, defeated. David then turned his attention slightly towards the lingering passengers. His gaze met Clarice Huntington's. "Mrs. Huntington, Mr. Thorne," he said, his tone cooling further. "Apex keeps detailed records of passenger interactions. While we value all our customers, we don't tolerate the deliberate mistreatment of fellow passengers or our staff when they are behaving professionally." He paused. "Your comments and actions today have been noted. Your premier status with Apex Airlines is under review." Clarice flushed crimson, sputtering, "Now, see here, I am—" But David merely looked past her, his point made. Marcus Thorne, usually quick with a retort, remained silent, understanding the implications. The public shaming, the loss of status. It was a blow to their carefully constructed images. Tiffany and Jake had already melted into the background, desperately trying to become invisible. Sarah watched, not with triumph, but with a quiet sadness. She hadn't wanted this confrontation, only respect. David took her hand. "Let's go home," he said softly. He nodded a final time to the executives, who were already dealing with the suspended crew members, and led Sarah away from the scene, leaving behind a tableau of stunned silence, public humiliation reversed, and careers potentially ruined. The whispers that followed them now were not of scorn, but of shock and awe. The woman in the simple gray dress held more power than anyone in that first-class cabin could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, the investigation confirmed numerous passenger accounts of the mistreatment Sarah had endured. Brenda Jenkins and Leo were ultimately terminated from Apex Airlines, their actions deemed a gross violation of company policy and ethics. The incident prompted a company-wide retraining initiative, personally overseen by Sarah, focusing on unconscious bias and reinforcing the mandate to treat every single passenger with equal respect, regardless of their attire, status, or seat number. Apex released a public statement apologizing for the incident without naming Sarah at her request, and reaffirming their commitment to dignity for all travelers. Clarice Huntington and Marcus Thorne found their Apex Premier status revoked indefinitely. A quiet but significant embarrassment within their social circles. Tiffany's social media post, initially intended to mock Sarah, backfired spectacularly when followers connected it to the emerging story, leading to a massive drop in her engagement and several canceled partnerships. The story, leaked anonymously, circulated online, becoming a viral cautionary tale about judging others. R. Kumar, Apex Respect, and simple, not second class, began trending. Sarah Vance, however, remained out of the spotlight. She continued her charity work, attended board meetings, and occasionally flew Apex, sometimes in first class, sometimes in coach. All was dressed in her simple, comfortable style. On her next flight, months later, she noticed a subtle difference. The flight attendants seemed more attentive to everyone, the assumptions less visible. A young man in a hoodie received the same courteous service as the woman in pearls beside him. Sarah smiled softly to herself, opening her paperback. Change was slow, but it was happening. She hadn't sought revenge, only respect, not just for herself, but for everyone who might be judged by the cover rather than the content of their character. Her quiet strength, combined with David's decisive action, had sent ripples through the airline, proving that true class had nothing to do with class distinctions. If this story about quiet strength and the importance of respect struck a chord with you, please give it a like, share it with your friends, leave a comment about your own experiences or thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that everyone deserves dignity. Thank you for watching.